The debris field was 11 kilometers wide. Sergeant Mara Vasquez stood at the edge of it in the gray pre-dawn and watched her breath fog against the cold, and tried to count the pieces and gave up somewhere past 200. The Chihuahuan Desert stretched flat and dark behind her. Ahead, the scatter of alloy fragments caught what little moonlight remained. Pale, almost blue, bent into shapes that had no name in any engineering manual she'd studied at Annapolis. She'd been deployed to extraction sites before, crashed drones, satellite debris, once a decommissioned Soyuz capsule that came down wrong over Kazakhstan. She knew what human-made wreckage looked like when it hit dirt at velocity. She knew the smell of burned wiring and ruptured fuel cells and the particular tang of scorched titanium. This smelled like nothing. She crouched and picked up a piece the size of her palm. The edges were smooth where they should have been jagged. The material was neither warm nor cold. It was lighter than it had any right to be, and when she flexed it experimentally it bent, and then, without springing back, it resumed its original shape, slowly, like it was remembering what it was supposed to be. She set it down carefully and stood up. Behind her, Private Beto Reyes was photographing the field with a night vision rig, moving in slow, systematic arcs the way she'd taught him. Farther back, near the jeep, Corporal Dina Park was on the sat phone, voice low, reading coordinates. Vasquez could hear the clipped syllables of Park's reporting voice, the one that meant she was talking to someone above their pay grade. Sergeant. Reyes was calling from 30 meters out. You need to come see this. She walked toward him, and the thing her boots found in the sand stopped her cold. It was roughly the size of a basketball. It was not a basketball. It had 4. She counted again. 4 lobes arranged in bilateral symmetry around a central depression that looked unsettlingly like a closed eye. The surface had a texture she couldn't describe, except by saying it wasn't a texture she'd encountered before. Not smooth, not rough, not patterned. Her brain kept trying to map it onto something familiar and kept failing. The color was wrong in a way that was hard to articulate. It was gray, and also not gray. It seemed to absorb light from one angle and return it from another. Don't touch it, she said. I wasn't going to. Good. She photographed it. She photographed it from 6 angles, then crouched and photographed it from below. She noted the GPS coordinates in her field log. She noted the time, 0317 hours, the 14th of August. She noted that the air temperature at the object's surface, according to her wrist unit, read exactly ambient, which meant either the sensor was broken or the object had been lying in the desert long enough to equalize with its surroundings, which, given the heat differential between day and night in the Chihuahuan Basin, meant it had been here at minimum 48 hours, possibly much longer. Park, she called back. Who are we talking to? A pause. Use Northcom, ma'am, they're routing it up. Reading it where? Another pause. They didn't say. Vasquez stood and looked at the debris field stretching away from her in the moonlight. 11 kilometers wide. Whatever had come apart here had come apart traveling very fast and from very high up and in complete silence. There had been no reported sonic boom, no seismic event, nothing on regional radar. She was intimately familiar with what a military aircraft looked like when it failed at altitude. She was intimately familiar with what a civilian aircraft looked like when it failed at altitude. She had studied enough accident reports to have a working mental taxonomy of aerial disasters. None of them produced debris like this. None of them produced objects that remembered their shape. She pulled out her notebook. Paper, the old kind, because electronics logged everything now, and she had learned years ago that there were observations better kept off the record. And she wrote down what she saw, the total count of visible pieces, the spread pattern, the central eye lobe object, the material properties, the absence of smell. She wrote in her small, careful hand, the way her father had taught her to write field notes, the way he'd written them himself in 12 years as a geological surveyor across the deserts of the Southwest before his knees gave out. And he took the teaching job and started telling her bedtime stories about reading rock strata, like sentences in a very old language. She capped the pen. She looked at the sky. Whatever you are, she said quietly, to no one to the dark, you came a long way. By 0700 they had been relieved by a unit she didn't recognize. No unit patch, black trucks. They were polite and efficient. And they showed credentials that checked out on the database. And they thanked Vasquez for her work and told her she was free to file her report through standard channels. She filed her report through standard channels. 3 weeks later, she was summoned to Fort Bliss for what the orders described as a routine intelligence review. The officer who interviewed her was named Carson. He was not unkind. He asked her to describe what she'd seen, and she described it, and he wrote things down and nodded, and at the end of the interview he said, "Sergeant, you understand that the debris field was the result of a classified atmospheric research platform operating under Project Cirrus. The material properties you describe are consistent with experimental polymer composites currently under development by DARPA." She said, "Sir," he says, "your field report reflects that understanding." She looked at the field report he had placed in front of her. It had her name and service number at the top. The observations section had been altered. The object with the 4 lobes was not in it. She said, "That's not what I wrote." He said, "Sergeant Vasquez, I want you to understand that the work you do is important. The work we all do is important. And sometimes part of that work is trusting that the people with a fuller picture of a situation are in a better position to characterize it than the people who encountered one small piece of it." She looked at him for a long time. He had kind eyes. She had known people with kind eyes who were liars, and people with hard eyes who were honest as stone, and she was not able to determine which category applied here. She signed the report. She drove back to Biggs Army Airfield. She sat in her car in the parking lot for 20 minutes before she went inside. She thought about the way the material had been lighter than it should have been. She thought about the object that remembered its shape. She thought about the eye that was closed. She thought, it wasn't open because it was dead. She thought, what if it wasn't always dead? The reunion was held at the VFW Hall in Las Cruces 31 years later. Vasquez was 64 now, gray at the temples, retired 2 years, still carrying herself like someone who expected to be observed. She wore civilian clothes to the reunion because she had been wearing civilian clothes the night of the recovery. And it seemed right. She drove herself. She had not told her daughter where she was going. Not exactly. Had said only that she was attending a gathering of former colleagues, which was true. The hall was small and smelled of old wood and the particular institutional coffee that she associated with every military gathering she'd ever attended. There were perhaps 40 people there, most of them older than her, a few younger. She recognized 2 of them. Beto Reyes, now running a landscaping business in Albuquerque and moving more slowly than she remembered, and Dina Park, who had made colonel before she retired and who embraced Vasquez with the particular warmth of someone who had carried something heavy for a long time and was glad to see another person who had carried the same weight. "You got the letter," Park said. "I got the letter. I almost didn't come." "Me neither." The letter had arrived 6 weeks prior. It was not officially from anyone. It had a return address in Santa Fe, and her name on the envelope in a hand she did not recognize, and inside was a single sheet that read, "There are people who were at the site on the 14th of August. Some of them are still asking questions. If you are still asking questions, come." Vasquez had put the letter on her kitchen table and looked at it for 3 days. On the 4th day, she booked a hotel room in Las Cruces. There was a man at the front of the hall who introduced himself as Townsend. He was old, older than anyone else in the room by at least a decade, and he moved like someone carrying something invisible across his shoulders, but he had clear eyes, and he introduced himself without rank or institutional affiliation, and he said, "I want to thank you all for coming. I want to say first that I know what it cost some of you to be here. I know what you gave up to stay quiet. I know what it did to some of you." He paused. "I was in the hangar," he said. "Not the night of your recovery, Sergeant Vasquez. Earlier. 1947. I was 22 years old, and I was a logistics technician, and I was told to inventory certain items that had arrived by transport from New Mexico. I have spent the rest of my life, 57 years, trying to decide whether what I saw was real, whether I had the right to say anything, whether saying something would matter." He looked around the room. "I am 80 years old, and I have made my decision." What Townsend described matched nothing in any official record, and matched everything Vasquez had seen in the desert and could not explain. He described the alloy, the shape memory property, the absence of any recognizable manufacturing process. No seams, no welds, no evidence of having been assembled from components. He described the eye lobe object, which he called by the description used in the inventory manifest of 1947. Biological unit, dormant, purpose unknown. He described 6 additional units that had been recovered, 2 of which showed signs of what the manifest called residual thermal activity, meaning they were slightly warmer than ambient. He described the bodies. She had known there would be bodies. They were small. They were not human. They had been handled, he said, with extreme care. More care, he said quietly, than you might expect given the circumstances. Because whoever had directed the recovery operation in 1947 had understood something that she thought she understood too now, looking at his face. They had understood that the beings who had come down in the New Mexico desert had not come looking for a fight. They came to observe, Townsend said. That's what the analysts concluded, though the analysis was never published. Long-duration observation mission. They'd been watching for, we didn't know how long. Decades, maybe. The craft that went down in 47 was one of several. The others didn't crash. He paused. The others are still here. There was silence in the hall. Park said, quietly. Here meaning orbiting, Townsend said. Here meaning watching. Vasquez thought about this. She had thought about it many times in 31 years. Not the watching part, which she had assumed, but the why, the what are they looking for. She had a theory she had never said out loud to anyone, because it sounded either paranoid or, depending on how you looked at it, oddly comforting. She said it now. They're not sure what to do with us. Townsend looked at her. The ones in 47, she said. The ones in my field in August. They came down. They watched. They didn't initiate contact. They didn't broadcast. They didn't interfere. She paused. 40 years between those 2 incidents and they still haven't decided. Which means we're a problem they can't solve with whatever framework they've got. Which means there's something about us that doesn't fit. That's a generous interpretation, Reyes said carefully. Maybe. She looked at her hands. The hands that had picked up the piece of alloy that remembered its shape. The hands that had taken the photographs they'd confiscated. The hands that had signed the falsified report. Or maybe they've seen 1,000 civilizations. Maybe they've got categories for all of them. And we don't fit any of the categories, and that's not a problem for us. That's a problem for them. The meeting broke up around midnight. People exchanged contact information and drove away under a sky blazing with stars. And Vasquez stood in the parking lot, breathing the desert air, and looking up the way she had looked up in the debris field 31 years ago. She heard footsteps and Townsend appeared at her shoulder. You know what I remember most, he said. From 1947? She waited. The manifest, he said. The inventory. Someone, I never found out who, had written in the margin of the final page, in pencil, small letters. I memorized it. I've thought about it for 57 years. He paused. It said, they have fire, they have music, they bury their dead, classification. Indeterminate. She looked at the sky. Indeterminate, she said. Indeterminate. He said it like it was the most important word he had ever learned. Not dangerous, not harmless, not primitive, not advanced. Indeterminate. Whatever they had seen from up there, whatever they had recorded and sent back to wherever they came from, it didn't fit. It didn't resolve. She thought about her father in the desert, reading rock strata like sentences. She thought about the way he would crouch over a formation and say, this one I haven't seen before. Not with fear, with something closer to joy. She thought about the material that remembered its shape. She thought about the eye that was closed. She thought, what if indeterminate was the most dangerous thing you could be to something that needed to classify everything it encountered? What if uncertainty was its own kind of power? What if the reason they had been watching for decades, careful, quiet, not interfering, was not contempt and not fear, but something more like the feeling a scientist gets when they find a specimen that breaks the taxonomy? What if humanity was the thing that broke the taxonomy? Major Vasquez, Townsend said. She hadn't held that rank in over a decade, but she didn't correct him. What do you think happens next? She thought about it. They keep watching, she said, and we keep being what we are, confusing, contradictory, building things and burning them down and building them again. Writing things down in notebooks nobody's supposed to see. Coming to reunions because we can't stop asking questions. She looked at him. I think that confuses them more every year, she said. I think we're winning an argument we don't even know we're having. She got in her car. She drove west into the dark. The stars were very bright, and she kept checking the rearview mirror, not out of fear, but out of the old habit of a woman who had spent her career noticing things she wasn't supposed to notice. and who had decided a long time ago that noticing was not optional. Somewhere above her, if Townsend was right, something was watching. She drove with the windows down. She was humming. Not a tune from anywhere in particular, just a sound her body made when it was thinking. Something her father used to do too, and his mother before him according to family legend, a low improvised melody that helped her think. She was still humming when she hit the highway. The stars wheeled overhead. The desert ran away on both sides of the road, dark and flat and immense and indifferent, the way the desert always was. She thought, let them watch. She thought, they'll never figure us out. She smiled at the road ahead and kept driving, and the hum she made in the dark was not a song from anywhere they would recognize, from any archive or database or millennia of long-distance observation. It was hers. It was her father's. It was human in a way that could not be cataloged or classified or filed away in any inventory under any designation except the one that someone had scrawled in the margin of a manifest 77 years ago in pencil. In small, careful letters, the way you write something down when you already know that a file can be altered, but a moment of truth, written in the right hand, has a way of persisting. Classification. Indeterminate. She drove into the dark and the lights above her held still.